Welcome to the fourth lecture in Module 2. In this lecture, we'll talk about the philosophy behind Ruby on Rails. There are three main things that we want to discuss with regards to the Rails philosophy. The first is convention over configuration. And what I mean by this is that the most common aspects of a web application are provided for you by Rails. So don't fight against them. Use them. A developer should only be responsible for specifying those parts of the application that are different or unconventional. The things that Rails gives you for free, you should use. The second is don't repeat yourself or dry. And you hear this term used all the time with Rails programming. We need to dry up this code. And this is a very common term that you hear. And again, that stands for don't repeat yourself. What does that mean? It means that every piece of information in a Rails application should appear in a single, unambiguous, and authoritative place. And the various pieces of the application that might need that data know where to find it. It also means that if you change that, then you're changing the data in one place, and all of the various parts of the application know where to go in order to find that. What you don't want is to have data spread out, so if you change it one place and forget to change it someplace else, it breaks the code. The third is Rails is based upon the agile programming principles. And the most important thing with agile software development is to get software working. And agile development is based on this iterative and incremental software development process where you get a piece of the code working, always keeping the code working, and then add a little bit more to it. So that's the incremental part, and iteratively add more and more and more until you get the full application where you need it. So let's talk about each of these in more detail. First, convention over configuration. Rails has a massive number of conventions that are built into it, and the real trick with Rails is learning all of them. When you create a Rails application, we've already seen that you get a full web stack that's pre-wired and ready to go. You get code generators. These code generators have specific naming conventions that you shouldn't fight against. If you use the model view controller scaffold generator, you get, let's take an example of one that we've already built. In our blog application, when we created the post scaffold, you got a class called post given to you automatically. And look in the code and you'll see it there. In addition, there was a database table created for you called posts. There's a RESTful controller created for you called the post controller. Look inside the controllers directory and you'll see it. And what does this mean, REST? We'll talk more about that later, but basically it means that the CRUD operations are supplied for you, the create, read, update, and destroy. If you look inside that post controller, you'll see those. You'll see the ability to create, read, update, and destroy posts. In addition, all of the views that go with posts for displaying posts are created for you as HTML. So take a look and you'll see those under the views folder. And finally, a whole set of tests are provided for you automatically that are related to posts. So this is the notion of using code generators to build an application automatically that has all the pieces working together from the get-go. Let's look in more detail about the don't repeat yourself principle. And again, this is the notion that every piece of information should have a single, unambiguous, authoritative representation within the system. For example, in Rails, we'll see that with active records, once you specify a model, you don't need to name the columns in the database. They're pulled from the model automatically. In other words, they're determined from the model. You can see if the active record model has one set of names and you have to simultaneously maintain the database, if you change the active record model and forget to change the database, you've created an error. Rails does this for you automatically. When this is done the right way, then a modification of the system is just that. You don't have to go through and change all of the related pieces of the system. The application is keeping those things in sync for you. This makes it a lot easier to use code generators and things of that nature to help build your system, and that's why Rails relies heavily on code generators. So this is what you see with dry code. It's usually created through these data transformations, code generators, and it allows software developers to quickly create code and avoid this copy and paste set of operations where if you make a change, you've got to copy that change and paste it to a whole bunch of other places in your application. If you're following dry programming, you're not doing those things. The dry principle also makes it a lot easier to maintain large software systems. If all of the things that we're talking about, if it leads to less opportunity for errors, particularly when you have large teams of programmers working on a project, then it makes the software more reliable, easier to maintain. Next, let's talk about agile development. Again, Rails emphasizes agile programming. And the primary measure of success in an agile process is working software. It's available to you immediately. We've already seen that with the code generators we've run in our blog application. The other thing that's very nice about Rails is that in the development mode, you'll see that if you change your code and you're running the web server in development mode, you don't have to recompile. It's ready to go as soon as you make that change. You don't have to go through the process of restarting the web server or doing anything like that, restarting the database. In the development mode, that happens automatically anytime you change your code. Rails has a number of simple tools to generate code quickly for you, and testing is built right in. Testing is a vital part of agile development practices. And some of the more famous ones are the extreme programming approach that agile development efforts grew out of. And there are two approaches that are very popular. The first is test-driven development. And with test-driven development, you design your tests first, and then you build your code to satisfy those tests. Taking that a step further is behavior-driven development. In behavior-driven development, you define the behavior of the code that you'd like to see, and you design your code so as to satisfy that behavior. What's nice about behavior-driven development is it's based on natural language. You describe the behavior in English, and this makes it very easy for you to work with a customer. The customer can understand what you're saying if you're using natural language to describe the behavior of a system. Behavior-driven development focuses on obtaining a very clear understanding of what the customer wants and then building the code that satisfies that. There are two tools that we'll use that work with Ruby on Rails. One is called RSpec and the other is called Cucumber, and both of these support behavior-driven development. Now, this philosophy has been treated somewhat out of context for you because we haven't done a lot of Rails development, but I wanted you to see this philosophy up front so that as you learn more and more about Rails, you can see these things as a part of what Rails is, and hopefully you embrace them and don't fight against them. That's a very important part of learning to be productive with the Ruby on Rails framework. This completes the fourth lecture in Module 2.